All right. Welcome back, Elizabeth. What are you covering today?
Hello. Today I am covering the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021.
Perfect.
Now, before I get started, I would just like to add a little production note that this episode is intended as a factual historical account. It's not a political endorsement of any party, candidate, or viewpoint.
Yeah.
Think of me as Andrea Canning. I'm delivering the facts.
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right. So we're just going to get right into it. This is kind of, we all are familiar with it, but I wanted to really take it apart and look at it just from the
Yeah.
facts, not from right or left, from just how the hell did we end up here as a society and as a country.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So, all right. Picture the most secure government building in the United States. Picture lawmakers meeting to complete a constitutional process that has happened for generations. Now picture a shirtless man wearing a fur hat with horns standing in the Senate chamber. Sounds like satire, but it wasn't. It was January 6, 2021. Began as a day of political speeches and constitutional procedure. It ended with broken windows, evacuated lawmakers, injured police officers, a halted certification of a presidential election, and some of the strangest images in modern American history. Years later, Americans still disagree about what to call January 6th, but regardless of politics, everyone can agree on one thing. Nobody expected that day to unfold the way it did. Today we're telling the story from beginning to end. No campaign slogans, no partisan taking points, just timeline, the people involved, the bizarre moments, and the facts. January 6th, the day America argued with itself. To understand January 6th, you have to understand why Congress was meeting that day. The 2020 election had been called for Joe Biden. President Donald Trump disputed the results, repeatedly claimed the election had been stolen. Dozens of court challenges failed, state certifications proceeded, the Electoral College voted. Now Congress was preparing to count those electoral votes and formally certify the result. Normally, this process is about as exciting as washing paint dry while reading tax forms. But 2021 would be different. Trump supporters from around the country traveled to Washington for a rally. Many genuinely believed the election result was wrong. Others simply wanted to support the president. Still, others arrived with far more confrontational intentions. Most people had no idea how that day would end. This story actually starts before sunrise on January 6th. On the evening of January 5th, someone placed pipe bombs outside the headquarters of both the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee. The devices were discovered the next day. The suspect has never been publicly identified, and that's a detail that's often forgot. But investigators consider it one of the most significant unsolved pieces of the entire story. On the morning of January 6th, Washington woke up cold. Thousands of people were already gathering near the White House. Vendors sold merchandise. People took selfies. Some attendees treated the trip like a political convention. Others viewed it as a historic last stand. The mood was energetic. For many, it almost felt festive. At the Capitol, meanwhile, lawmakers prepared for what should have been a routine certification process. Vice President Mike Pence would preside over the count. Members of the Congress would review electoral votes, then the winner would be certified. Simple, at least on paper. Shortly before noon, speeches began. Various speakers addressed the crowd, then President Trump took the stage. For more than an hour, he repeated claims that the election had been stolen and encouraged supporters to march toward the Capitol. While that speech was happening, events elsewhere were already beginning to move faster than anyone realized. Crowds were growing around the Capitol grounds. Barriers were being challenged. Police officers were becoming increasingly concerned, and Congress was beginning its work. At approximately 1 p.m., lawmakers convened in a joint session of Congress. The process of counting electoral votes began. And if you've ever watched any of these procedures, it is pretty much the TV equivalent of a warm glass of milk. Lots of paperwork, lots of speeches, very little drama, but outside, something was changing. Crowds were pressing against security barriers. Some demonstrators moved closer and closer to the building, police lines began to strain, and the situation was escalating fast. Shortly after 1 p.m., protesters overwhelmed some of the outer barriers. Officers attempted to hold the lines. Some were shoved, some were struck. Others found themselves badly outnumbered. Within a relatively short period, parts of the crowd reached the Capitol itself. Windows were broken, doors were forced open, and for the first time in generations, a large crowd breached the United States Capitol while Congress was in session. Inside the House chamber, lawmakers suddenly received urgent warnings. Security officers moved quickly. Proceedings stopped. Members were instructed to prepare for evacuation. Some lawmakers later described hearing pounding noises and believing people were attempting to enter nearby areas. Others barricaded doors with furniture. Some grabbed gas masks stored beneath their seat. For a brief period, nobody knew exactly how bad the situation would become. The crowd had entered the United States Capitol. Nobody inside knew exactly what would happen next. For lawmakers, staff members, journalists, and police officers, the next few hours would become some of the most intense moments of their life. As members of the crowd entered the Capitol, the situation became quickly chaotic. The Capitol is enormous, hundreds of rooms, long hallways, historic chambers, offices, underground tunnels. Even many longtime employees don't know every corner of the building. Now imagine thousands of people moving through this maze while law enforcement tries to determine where everyone is. That's what officers faced. Some individuals wandered aimlessly, others searched for specific rooms. Many recorded everything on their phones. Some took photos as though they were tourists, others appeared far more confrontational. Investigators would later sort through tens of thousands of hours of video footage, trying to reconstruct exactly who went where. One of the most famous scenes unfolded inside the Senate chamber. Minutes earlier, senators had been debating electoral votes. Now that room sat nearly empty. Some members had been rushed off with only moments to spare. The crowd entered, people sat at senators' desks, some took pictures, others recorded videos. A place usually associated with formal speech suddenly looked more like a bizarre field trip gone wrong. One participant reportedly shouted, "Trump won that election." Others posed for pictures. History and absurdity had collided. No single image became more recognizable than the man wearing a fur hat with horns. His real name is Jacob Chansley. The public would come to know him as a QAnon shaman. Face paint, tattoos, no shirt, a spear tapped to the American flag. All of the images produced on January 6th, this became one of the defining photographs. If someone had shown the Americans that image in 2019 and asked them to guess what was happening, almost nobody would have gotten it right. Very few would have guessed the United States Senate. Another image spread across the internet almost instantly. A man smiling while carrying a wooden lectern throughout the Capitol. The photograph became
Yeah.
one of the most widely shared images of the day. There was something strangely symbolic about it. Thousands of people had gathered, Congress had halted proceedings, and somehow one of the most famous images involved a man casually carrying furniture. Humor aside, the image became a visual shorthand for the day's order. One of the most discussed incidents occurred in the office of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Several individuals entered that area. One man sat at the desk and posed for photographs. A handwritten note left behind reportedly said, "We will not back down." The photographs spread worldwide. Supporters and critics alike recognized that the symbolism was powerful. The office of one of the nation's highest-ranking elected officials had been entered during an attack on the Capitol itself. While strange photos dominated social media, a much more serious version was unfolding elsewhere. Capitol Police were fighting to show the crowd's movement through the building. Many officers found themselves heavily outnumbered. Body camera footage later showed officers being pushed, struck, sprayed with chemical irritants, and forced backward through hallways and doorways. Some officers later described believing they might not survive the day. Others continued, directing people to safety despite being exhausted or injured. One officer repeatedly guided lawmakers away from approaching crowds. Another divided people from entering areas where members of Congress had only recently been evacuated. Those actions likely prevented even more dangerous confrontations. One of the most dramatic moments happened outside the House chamber. Lawmakers were still being evacuated. Police officers guarded the entrance. Members of the crowd approached. Officers drew weapons. Furniture had been stacked against doors. For several tense minutes, everyone involved understood the stakes. Fortunately, lawmakers were successfully evacuated from the crowd gained access to the chamber. What happened next remains one of the most discussed moments of the day. A woman attempting to climb through a broken window near the chamber entrance was shot by a Capitol police officer. She later died from her injuries. That incident became one of the most controversial and heavily debated moments of January 6th. January 6th provides several examples of why history is stranger than fiction. One participant allegedly stole a letter from Speaker Pelosi's office. Another carried zip ties through the Capitol, creating serious concern among investigators. Several individuals took selfies while crimes were actively being committed around them. Others posted videos of themselves online. Some even helped investigators identify them later. For generations, criminals have tried to avoid being photographed, and in 2021, some voluntarily uploaded evidence to social media. Investigators later described open source videos and social media posts as valuable evidence in many cases. As events unfolded, some individuals moved through the Capitol searching for elected officials. This dramatically increased concern among security professionals. Fortunately, most members of Congress had already been moved to secure locations. Vice President Mike Pence was also evacuated to a protected area. His security detail reportedly resisted suggestions that he leave the Capitol complex entirely. The certification process had been stopped, but constitutional continuity remained the goal. Government officials wanted Congress to finish its work once the building was secure. At that moment, however, nobody knew how long that would take. Meanwhile, outside the building, thousands of people remained on Capitol grounds. It's important to remember that not everyone present committed crimes. Some never entered the building. Some stayed in designated areas. Others left when conditions deteriorated. At the same time, hundreds entered restricted areas or the Capitol itself. Investigators would later spend years sorting through individual actions, evidence, and charges. The distinction mattered, and it remains one of the most important facts when discussing January 6th. Not every attendee was charged, not every participant engaged in violence, but enough people did that Congress was forced to stop a constitutional proceeding for the first time in modern American history. As afternoon turned toward evening, law enforcement agencies from across the region converged on Washington. Additional officers arrived, plans were made to clear the Capitol. National Guard forces would soon be deployed, and inside the building, the process of regaining control was finally beginning. The question now wasn't whether the Capitol would be secure, the question was how quickly, and whether Congress would return. Because despite everything that had happened, many lawmakers were already insisting on one thing: the count would continue, no matter what. By late afternoon on January 6th, the United States Capitol was no longer functioning as a seat of Congress. The certification of a presidential election had stopped, lawmakers were in secure locations, police officers were exhausted, and across the country, millions of Americans were glued to their televisions, trying to understand what they were watching. One question quickly emerged: how did this happen? In the months and years that followed, investigators, journalists, congressional committee, and independent reviews would examine that question. The answer wasn't simple. There wasn't one failure. There was many. Warnings existed before January 6th. Law enforcement agencies had seen online discussions suggesting some people planned to travel to Washington and potentially engage in violence. Various intelligence reports identified concerns about extreme groups and the possibility of unrest. But information was fragmented. Some warnings were not widely shared, others were not fully acted upon, and many officials believed the available security measures would be sufficient. They were not. The Capitol Police Force was overwhelmed far more quickly than expected. Crowd sizes exceeded assumptions, barriers were breached, and the situation escalated faster than the contingency plans anticipated. One of the recurring conclusions from later investigations was that authorities underestimated both the size of the crowd and the willingness of some participants to force their way into the Capitol. There's another factor that often gets overlooked. The Capitol wasn't built like a fortress. Unlike military bases or intelligence facilities, the Capitol traditionally serves as a public building. Tourists visit every day. School groups walk through its halls. Citizens meet lawmakers. The building's design reflects openness. On January 6th, that openness became a vulnerability. The challenge for security professional was impossible to miss. How do you protect a symbol of democracy while also keeping it accessible? That question existed long before January 6th. Afterward, it became impossible to ignore. Amid the chaos, countless officers made decisions that rarely made headlines. Many simply did their jobs under extraordinary circumstances. Some officers directed lawmakers through evacuation routes. Others held doors, stairwells, and hallways against overwhelming numbers. Many worked for hours without relief. One of the most remarkable examples involved Capitol Officer Eugene Goodman. As rioters moved through parts of the building, Goodman encountered members of the crowd and deliberately drew their attention away from nearby Senate chambers where lawmakers had only recently been evacuated. Video footage later showed him calmly backing away while redirecting people down another corridor. The scene lasted only moments, but those moments may have prevented a direct confrontation between lawmakers and the crowd. It's one of those instances where history can turn on a few seconds and a single person's decision. As the situation worsened, officers began discussing additional support. The National Guard would eventually be deployed. But one of the biggest controversies after January 6th centered on timing. Why did it take so long? Who had the authority to request assistance? Who approved deployment? Who should have acted sooner? Those questions became subjects of extensive investigation. What is clear is that the Guard personnel eventually arrived in joint efforts to secure the area. By evening, law enforcement agencies from across the Washington region were working together to clear the Capitol complex. The operation was gradual, methodical, and tense. Officers had to determine who remained inside, which areas were secure, and whether additional threats existed. Remember the pipe bombs discovered earlier in the day? Authorities still had to consider the possibility of other devices or coordinated attacks. For law enforcement leaders, uncertainty remained extremely high. Meanwhile, a very different kind of investigation was already beginning. Social media users were identifying people in photos and videos almost immediately. Some internet users became accidental detectives. Others simply recognized friends, neighbors, coworkers, and relatives. The sheer amount of video evidence was staggering. Participants had documented events from nearly every angle imaginable. At times, investigators barely needed to ask what happened. The footage often showed it. One former federal prosecutor joked that this was perhaps the most extensively self-recorded crime scene in modern history. It might be an exaggeration, but really not by that much. Imagine investigators opening a case file and finding suspects had already uploaded hours of high-definition footage with video timestamps. Law enforcement agencies received thousands of tips in the days that followed, and many of them eventually led to arrests. As darkness fell over Washington, authorities slowly regained control. Officers moved room by room, hallway by hallway, entrance by entrance. Crowds dispersed. Some participants left voluntarily, others were removed. The atmosphere shifted. The urgency of the afternoon gave way to a long process of securing the building. Broken glass littered parts of the Capitol. Offices had been entered, property had been damaged, and one of the most important, recognizable buildings in the world now looked very different than it had that morning. For lawmakers watching from secure locations, the next question became increasingly important. Would Congress return? From a practical standpoint, lawmakers could have delayed certification. They could have returned another day. No one would have blamed them. The building had been attacked. The situation had been dangerous. The country was shaken. But many members of Congress argued that postponing the certification would send the wrong message. The constitutional process had been interrupted. Therefore, the constitutional process should continue. Not next week, not tomorrow, that night. That decision would become one of the defining moments of January 6th. Not because everyone agreed politically, but because members from across the political spectrum ultimately returned to complete the process. Outside, Washington felt different. The crowds had largely dispersed, roads were closed, police vehicles lined street, National Guard personnel stood watch, television crews reported from nearly every corner of the city. For millions of Americans, the images felt surreal. The Capitol had always seemed permanent, stable, and untouchable. Now viewers had watched events unfold in real time that many assumed could never happen in modern America. The shock wasn't just about what happened, it was about where it happened. Inside the Capitol, crews worked quickly, damage was assessed, debris was removed, security sweeps were completed, lawmakers to return. The constitutional process that began that morning would resume, the certification would continue, and the final chapter of January 6th was about to begin. It was nearly 8 p.m. The Capitol had been cleared, the halls were quieter, the broken glass had been swept away from many areas. National Guard personnel stood watch outside. And after one of the most extraordinary days in modern American history, members of Congress began walking back into the building. For the first time in hours, the government was about to resume its work. We all know the feeling of working a long day and wanting to go home. Members of Congress had been evacuated. Staff members had been sheltered in secure locations. Police officers had spent hours responding to a crisis, yet lawmakers returned. Democrats, Republicans, supporters of President Trump, critics of President Trump, everyone who agreed on almost nothing politically, but on this point, there was broad agreement. The electoral vote count needed to be completed. The world was watching. The certification process resumed, one state objection at a time, one speech at a time, and one vote at a time. The same slow process that had been interrupted earlier in the day continued late into the night, only now every action carried additional weight. Shortly before dawn on January 7th, Congress completed its work. The electoral votes were counted. The result was certified. Joseph Biden was officially confirmed as the winner of the 2020 presidential election. The constitutional process that had been interrupted had ultimately been completed. Regardless of political views, that moment marked the formal conclusion of one of the most contentious presidential elections in modern American history. For many lawmakers, simply finishing the process became a testament in itself. The message was straightforward. The attack had disrupted this certification. It had not stopped it. The next morning, Americans woke up to a flood of headlines. Newspapers around the world carried photographs from the Capitol. Television networks replayed footage continuously. Foreign leaders issued statements. Political leaders offered sharply different interpretations of what had happened. Everyone seemed to be discussing the same question: how should January 6th be remembered? And that debate continues today. It will likely continue for decades. But before historians could debate the meaning of January 6th, investigators had a more immediate task: finding everyone involved. The federal investigation that followed became one of the largest criminal investigations in the history of the FBI. Agents reviewed security footage, cell phone records, body camera videos, social media posts, photographs, news footage, witness statements, tips poured in from across the country. Many people who entered the Capitol had left behind an enormous digital trail. Some had live streamed their actions, others had posted photos, some had texted friends, a few had even spoken to reporters on camera. The evidence was extensive. Investigators spent years identifying individuals and determining what charges were appropriate. The result was thousands of arrests, convictions, plea agreements, and court proceedings connected to January 6th. It's easy to focus on the political aspects of January 6th, the speeches, the elections, the investigations, but there was also a human cost. Police officers suffered injuries, lawmakers and staff members described fear and uncertainty, families watched events unfold from home. A woman lost her life. Journalists found themselves reporting from the middle of a rapidly changing crisis. For many people who were present, January 6th remains one of the most stressful days of their lives. Regardless of political affiliation, those experiences were real, and they became part of the story. History has a strange way of choosing its images. When people think of the moon landing, they picture a footprint. When they think of the fall of the Berlin Wall, they picture crowds celebrating. When they think of January 6th, many immediately picture a man wearing horns in the Senate chamber. History often condenses complicated events into a handful of photographs, but the reality is always more complicated. January 6th wasn't one thing. It was thousands of people making thousands of decisions, some lawful, some unlawful, some courageous, some reckless, and some unforgettable. Even years later, historians continue examining questions raised by January 6th. Could security preparations have been better? Were warning signs missed? How should social media platforms respond to political misinformation? What role should political leaders play during moments of national tension? How can democratic institutions respond to unprecedented challenges? Reasonable people often disagree on the answer, but the questions remain important because January 6th wasn't just about one day. It was about vulnerability, institutions, trust, and the pressures placed on a democratic system. Perhaps the strangest lesson from January 6th is that history rarely unfolds the way we expect. People imagine history as a series of grand speeches and dramatic decisions. In reality, history is messy, confusing, human. Sometimes history is a police officer making a split-second decision in a hallway. Sometimes it's lawmakers sheltering behind locked doors. Sometimes it's investigators spending years reviewing evidence. And sometimes, somehow, it's a guy carrying a lectern through the Capitol while smiling at a camera. It's not always neat, but it's always human. On January 6, 2021, it was one of the most extraordinary days in modern American history. It interrupted a constitutional process, it exposed security weaknesses, and generated years of investigations and debate. And it produced images that will likely appear in history books for generations. Americans continue to disagree about many aspects of January 6th. That disagreement is part of the story, too. But whatever conclusion people reach, the events of the day remain significant because they tested institutions that millions of Americans depend on, often without thinking about them. The peaceful transfer of power, the rule of law, the functioning of Congress, the responsibility of citizens, the responsibilities of leaders. Those ideas existed before January 6th, during January 6th, and after January 6th.
Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to tell you about my sponsors quick. Sometimes I get on a roll cleaning or gardening, and I need a boost, but I don't have time for a meal. Big Fork Brand's pork jerky is the perfect choice to keep my momentum, offering high-protein snacks for on-the-go energy boosts. Not only do they offer pork jerky, but they also make pork sticks, bacon sausage, bacon hot dogs, and burger and hot dog sauces. Products come in a variety of delicious flavors, including Thai green curry and maple and brown sugar for the meat options, and gangster and Chicago fire for the sauces. I personally think the original flavor of the pork jerky hits just right after tackling a big chore. It's a little salty and very flavorful. My discount code gives you 20% off your entire order, and it's currently the best deal available. Just visit bigforkbrands.com and enter in my promo code JADE, that's JADE, at checkout. Are you looking for a gift for a music lover, or maybe some apparel to show off your quirky side? Old Glory has you covered. With over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture, you're guaranteed to find the perfect item. They even have seasonal gear. My husband enjoys the Led Zeppelin and Beatles apparel, and I love the Billy Idol apparel. I even found some items for my fellow plant enthusiasts. This family-owned superstore is known for their quality and customer service, offers free standard shipping on all orders, and orders are shipped the same day you purchase. My discount code gives you 15% off your entire order, and it's currently the best deal available. Just visit oldglory.com and enter in my promo code JADE, that's JADE, at checkout. Looking for a game-changing way to improve your health? Zevo Life is the world's most nutrient-dense whole plant, packed with over 50% plant protein, essential amino acids, fiber, and antioxidants. Harnessing the best nature has to offer, Zevo Life nourishes your body while driving your performance, vitality, and overall well-being. Each serving is a concentrated source of clean, well-balanced nutrition designed to support modern lifestyles, and just 1 teaspoon a day supports your gut, boosts energy, and promotes healthier skin and hair. It's no wonder it's receiving 5-star reviews. Step into a healthier future with a 30% discount and a 30-day risk-free guarantee by visiting zivo.life and using my promo code. To support my show and to receive 30% off your entire order, enter in my promo code JADE, that's JADE, at checkout. That was such a good summary or description of what happened because you almost forget all the different layers that within it because you mentioned the size of the building and all the different rooms. And then also just the different levels of participation. Like,
Yeah,
some were just innocent bystanders,
right.
some some were obviously doing things they shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, what a wild day that was. Like
Yeah, it was a lot of people doing a lot of work to get to this place, but their
Mhm.
intentions once being there were varied so greatly. And
Yeah,
I also think that we need to give credit to COVID because
yeah,
we were coming out of quarantine. People had lost their mind. We were all cooped up. We were all going crazy. I mean, the only human interaction you had was through social media.
yeah,
And now all of a sudden, there's this big social thing
mhm,
and something that's going to probably make history and define our next steps. I mean, it's not a wonder why so many people wanted to be involved in it.
right. Yeah. So, when I was seeing videos of people on the plane, like, there were planes
Yeah.
full of people in, their COVID masks and MAGA hats,
Hmm.
and, um, like, that's not a surprise to my audience, I'm a Trump fan,
Hmm.
and I told Kyle, I'm like, "I really wish we could go," just because it seemed like okay, like, I don't know if, like, Democrat listeners would believe this. If you go to a Republican, rally or convention or whatever, it is some of the nicest people you have ever met,
I
and
believe it. I mean, you're all agreeing on some of the most widely disagreed topics. I'm sure they're welcoming their
Mhm.
own. I'm sure I understand why people wanted to be there, but I don't think anyone
Yeah.
went there that day knowing what was going to happen. Unless
Oh,
someone was like, no
no,
matter what,
and
I'm getting to
now
that building.
after
But like, if only one person made that decision, it wouldn't have happened. Hundreds of people like just gassed each
yeah.
other and and broke
Mhm.
into the Capitol. I
Yeah,
mean, it's a crazy thing, especially
yeah.
because we're post 9/11 and other serious terrorist attacks. Like
Mhm.
our country has taken
Yeah,
security very serious for so long, and then
yeah.
this still happened.
Yeah. I and obviously now I'm happy that we didn't go
Yeah.
because, um, I sent you a clip of, like, a conversation I had with, Evan Turk from American Rights Alliance, and
Mhm.
where, like, I'm just curious by nature, and now, if I saw that someone was busting in a window and getting shot, I'd stay the hell away. But if I'm on the other side and somebody's like, "Hey, they're letting people in to do tours," and I didn't hear that someone had been killed and that things were getting violent and people were going into offices and destroying things,
Yeah.
I maybe would have walked in.
Yeah.
But
You
I
could have
I do
easily
trust that
been
my instincts, if
like,
I would have
yeah.
seen computers lagging a little bit, so hopefully it'll catch up. So the lectern guy, I'm happy you mentioned him. Just
Yeah.
he's funny. He is running for office somewhere in Florida.
Really?
Obviously he did some time for that. Yeah. He's one where it's like, okay, that wasn't the best decision. You did mess with property and shouldn't have been in there. I mean, he did only move it like a few feet and then did like I think a year for that. Because some of these sentences were pretty harsh
I think they were
for some of
making
the
it.
people. But what's that?
I think that the like law enforcement was making a point, was making an example
Mhm.
out of a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, he seems one of the because like also we were talking about how some of these people were extreme that
Mhm.
were in attendance. And this guy seemed like kind of one of the more normal people, but yeah, he has like a website, it's unlicensed furniture movers. And because he's moving the lectern. And then yeah, on X he's the lectern guy. But just I mean he's not out there really talking about he might joke like, "Yeah, I did a year for moving furniture," but he's not out there saying like, "I didn't do anything," like, he understands it wasn't the best decision, but,
Yeah, yeah, no, I think I
um
really did, and honestly, I am I'm surprised that there wasn't more deaths, just from, like, just mass chaos,
yeah,
and I'm thankful and surprised that the police didn't use more force, because this was
yeah,
crazy for a long time, and we saw what's happened with just, these protests and the people getting, shot by police officers or run over by civilians or shit like that. So it's a kind of a
mhm,
miracle in itself that this wasn't more deadly than it was.
yeah. Yeah, and that is one of the points that people make when they call this day an insurrection is that, like, none of these people were armed, you
Mhm.
know? Thankfully so.
Yeah, no
Um,
kidding. I mean, the guy with the horns had a spear, but he wasn't spearing people
right.
like it was part of his costume. But still a
Yeah,
bold choice because it is a
right. It yeah. And he was going around yelling, "Everyone remain
yeah,
peaceful, everyone remain peaceful," which is kind of a surprise, given his costume or
I
getup,
know.
but,
I know it would be
yeah,
I should see
that's
if there's any interviews with these people of like so what was the thought process for this outfit and what was going through your head when you were painting your face and putting your fur hat
yeah,
on?
yeah. I've seen interviews with him, and he is normal in his interviews most of the time. I
Yeah,
mean, in appearance. He like, he seems like he kinda surprised me that, he's never gonna listen to this. He seems intelligent, but also the type of person that could be sucked into any single conspiracy theory. Like,
yeah.
I followed him on X for a short while just because I was curious, and he was going around, Austin, Texas, and posting, like, all these things where there's this symbol means this and this imagery, just, very into the Illuminati and stuff like that, and, which I feel like is, like, an Austin thing, but
When I
just
saw
I don't know.
when I saw the picture of him like all dressed up, the meme that's going around,
Mhm.
it just he looks like a frat boy at a college football game.
That's funny. Yes, that's
That's exactly
exactly
what it looks like. He's, like, got face
w
paint for
I can totally
homecoming,
see it.
and, like, this guy,
Yeah,
he just looks like he's there to have a good
yeah.
time.
Right, right.
Um, I was
Okay,
thinking maybe
okay.
digging in a little bit more of some of the people that were there at the rally and that kinda was responsible for
Mhm.
firing up the rest of the crowd, like the Proud Boys, and other
Mhm.
leaders of certain groups that are notable. Of course, there's a lot more to talk about
Yeah,
than just January 6th, but they did heavily influence the way the events of January 6th were carried out. And that says a lot
yeah,
because, the Proud Boys are this white supremacist, misogynistic, anti-LGBTQ plus community or group, yet, you said, I would have liked to be there, but I know that you aren't you know, white supremacist and
yeah.
homophobic and anti-LGBTQ and all of those things. So it's just, I think,
Mhm.
important to take a look at the diversity of the people that were there. And hopefully, I can get a little bit of an idea of their mindset of what they were hoping to
Yeah.
accomplish. Like, what were
Well,
you going to the Capitol for? Were you there to protest and sign a petition? Or were you there thinking, if shit goes south, I'm on that train? Because I
right.
mean, it's hard to
And
defend the Proud
that's
Boys as not being on the train or the ones driving the train.
yeah.
And President Trump, too. I do think he has a
Right,
lot
and that
of culpability in this. He gassed these people up.
yeah, But did you hear that those videos were edited to make it look
Mm,
like he told them to go do that? And the
yeah,
BBC's
and
getting
that's why I
sued,
was
like,
really
a ton of
careful.
money.
Yeah, and that's why I was really careful about how I said that part because he did speak for over an hour and he said all these things
Yeah,
were false and that, but I wanted to be clear that
yeah,
he was never like, you guys should go break into the Capitol and try to destroy ballots and protected information.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, you did great with that timeline making you did great with that. So, I don't know if this was in the video I sent you, but it was basically Evan was explaining how was it Antifa and the Proud Boys, and they were trying to keep
yeah,
the 2 groups separate
yes,
because I mean, that's the perfect explanation. Both groups, opposite sides
yeah,
of the political aisle, were there, and what do you think they were there for, and why do you think they were trying to keep them separate?
right. That's the
To me,
thing.
that
It
says that
was
they don't have good intentions.
yeah, and it wasn't just,
Yeah.
mega that was there. That's not what this was. This was literally
Mhm.
from both sides there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's an important distinction to make is that, like, Antifa is not the Democrat Party.
Right.
Proud Boys, the KKK, whatever, is not the Republican Party. These are
Yeah.
extreme people that
Yes.
no one wants on their
Yes.
side.
Extremists are a category of their own, and it's very easy to cloud the rest of the
Mhm.
party by the extremists. But I mean, there's something to be said for that if you get too far left, you eventually start getting right, and if you get too far right, you start getting
Yeah.
left. Is it kind of this
Isn't
is
that
why
crazy?
Democrats back in the day aren't what Democrats are today. It kind of just keeps spinning.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It really does. 'Cause I mean, the Republicans today aren't the same as they were back in the day either,
No,
but
I would love to
yeah,
like if we
I
could have an interview with like my grandpa about like what because he was a
yeah,
Democrat, but like I'm sure his view on some of the things today would not be what mine are. So it would be
right.
interesting to have a
Yeah,
conversation with somebody of that much of an older generation who's been involved in politics their life and just
mhm,
as a civilian, the way things have changed and what
yeah,
that means today versus what it meant when they voted for the first time.
right, right. Yeah, it's, I hear a lot of the older generation, they'll say, "I'm an old school Democrat." They kinda
Yeah,
make that distinction.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's
I don't
interesting.
know for sure what that distinction is to
But,
them,
alright.
but
You know, I would like that kind of because, a lot of people, you hear all those clips about older Democrat or previous Democrats, like Bill Clinton and further back.
right.
They're saying a lot of stuff that Republicans are saying now. So
Mhm.
it's like Republicans have shifted left while maintaining like the religious component, and then Democrats have switched they're going into socialism or something.
Yeah.
Um,
I yeah, it would be
but
nice to have a
anyways,
conversation and say, like, what does an old school Democrat mean to you? And what does today's Democrat mean to you?
yeah,
And vice versa with Republicans, of course.
one of these days, right. Yeah, one of these days I'm gonna ask somebody that. I
Mhm.
I will say I will say, I'm really happy with what the Republicans are doing with the animal welfare right now. Like, that was one thing I was worried about when switching from blue to red, that
Yeah.
I was abandoning the party standing up for animals, and they've been killing it. Really
It's
happy
nice
with
to
the
to
ending
also
animal testing and stuff.
yeah, it's nice to know that you can have both, that both sides
Mhm. Yeah.
can be, pro animals and that or, to a degree, but it's just nice that those things you don't have to sacrifice because again, in today's world, it's not as red and blue, we'll say,
Yeah.
as it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess people kinda know what we can look forward to next time, diving
Yeah,
in a little further into J6. And
yeah, we'll
yeah,
continue our
thank you for watching.
and holding of events.